When Steel talks, everybody listens.
Mr. Winston Wellington from Trinidad, who came here in the late 60s and started computer science, but he had played with the North Star Steel Band in Trinidad before coming here, so he knew a lot about how to arrange for a steel band. And he became the arranger for the Brooklyn Airs, and oh my goodness, there they are, the Brooklyn Airs, 1975, when they won Panorama with his arrangement of, was it a tribute to Spree Simon, I believe, right?
That's correct,
yeah. So make him welcome, please. Then on his right is Garvin Blake, who came here, 1980s you came?
72.
72, whoa, okay. But Garvin is a terrific pan player, and we will hear him play shortly. But he became associated with Metro Steel Band and became Clyde Bradley's, shall I say, assistant? Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Clyde Bradley was a very, very famous steel pan arranger from Trinidad. Legendary now, he's passed away, but he led Metro and other bands to a number of titles in the Panorama contest. And so Garvin has played with him and knows a lot about that. So please make him welcome. And finally, we have someone who's not from Trinidad, but from St. Vincent. Mr. Frankie McIntosh is an arranger for the Soca and Calypso bands. In other words, when a Calypsonian has an idea for a song, they will take it to an arranger and they will help them put it together, figure out what the music should be, what the horn line should be, the bass and so forth, and the arrangement often can make the song. Frankie played in a family band, the Melatones, right? Back in St. Vincent, and his dad's band. Then he decided he wanted to come to Brooklyn, so he came here in the late 1960s, and he wanted to study music, and guess where he came? Brooklyn College. So please welcome our esteemed, distinguished alumni, Frankie McIntosh. So we're just going to chat here for a few minutes, and then we'll have some music. So, Winston, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the steel band, the Brooklyn Airs, and how you got started and so forth.
Oh yeah, sure. Brooklyn Airs Steel Band started in, I think it was 1970, something like that. Yeah, 1970. As a matter of fact, there's three guys started Brooklyn Airs. Glenn Oliver Shea, Mervyn Bunny James, and myself. And after a while, a couple of weeks later, a lot of people started coming in and joining in. And as a matter of fact, you also played with Brooklyn Airs for a while yourself. Yeah. Yeah. That's how we started.
I didn't know
Very
that.
simple, and we built ourselves up till we actually won one or two Panorama, because there was questions of whether we had won a certain Panorama. We were declared a winner, and a couple of days later, or later the same day, they claimed that another band won the Panorama instead of us. So that was a big controversy for a while. Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what goes into doing an arrangement? Because you came up with the arrangement that won the Panorama. So how do you do that? Where do you start?
When did I start
No,
arranging?
where do you start the arranging? What gives you the idea? How do you?
Oh, the idea. Well, with arranging a calypso, we just play just parts of the tune, and we try and get as much ideas as possible. You go home and you lay down in your bed at night and you're thinking about the melody, and you come up with different ideas, counter melodies, chords, fill-ins for the double seconds and things like that. You know, I learned a lot about arranging from Anthony Williams, the captain of Panam North Stars. I was a member of Panam North Stars before I came to New York.
Back in Trinidad.
Back in Trinidad, yeah. And I was also privileged to travel many countries with Panam North Stars. Yeah, so.
Very nice. And am I right that the source for these tunes, in this case, was a calypso that someone had sung that year?
1975, I think it was the year that we won that Panorama you're referring to. That's the picture that we just showed here. The tune was a tribute to Spree Simon with the tune.
So that was the name of the tune. Who would have sung that? Would that have?
That was one of the Kitchener's calypso, leading calypso that year. Yeah.
So that's where you first heard the tune, was a recording by a Calypsonian, is that right?
That's correct, yes, yeah.
Okay, so that's the way these things work. Well, let's keep on this kind of groove if we can, and ask Garvin, if you could tell us a little bit more about what goes on in a pan yard. I mean, how do we go from listening to a recording of one of the Calypsonians to this magnificent pieces like what we just heard from Chasm play with 100 people playing these different parts and so forth?
Well, we start off with playing, as I said, just playing the tune over and over until you get as much ideas as possible you could create, you know. Then we come up with an introduction to the tune. And then we have what you call bridges between the introduction to the actual tune. Then we have change the keys, you know, different things like that. We have different ideas where they might have maybe certain runs or certain styles of arrangements on the double second or the mid-range spans like the cellos and the guitars and you know, they use quadraphonic. No, but we didn't have that in those days. We didn't have quadraphonics. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's listen to one of the early recordings. This is from 1990 with the Metro Steel Orchestra. Clyde Bradley was the arranger, and one of the front tenor pans player was a young man named Garvin Blake. And so it sounded like this. So Garvin, what do you recall about that, and if you could tell us a little bit about just what goes on in a pan yard and so forth, because you spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, pan yard. Pan yard is an interesting space in the sense that it's a communal space. It's one of the few places where you see the creation of art. You get some people in a public space and the music happens right in front of your eyes if you choose to go there repeatedly over the summer. So part of a pan yard is social. There's lots of young people making friends, and the other main function is it's musical. You know, so there's a lot of dynamics in a pan yard. For the most part, the main purpose in the summer in New York is this competition called Panorama that Ray showed some clips of. And what Panorama is really all about is really taking a calypso and expanding it. So to use an analogy, a panorama arrangement is essentially, it follows like a classical form, which would be the sonata form. You have a theme, which is your calypso, then you develop it, you do as much as you can with it, not to lose the listener, and that's where the creativity comes in, and you get back. At some point, you get back to the theme. So you have a whole summer of doing this, so you have the highs and lows of that. You know, they start the song, there's some dynamics, we don't like the song, some other band is sounding better. So it has this real cultural community feel, but you're creating music at the same time. So pan yard has this interesting dynamic where it's a musical environment, but it's also social. So you're really creating music in a social space. Most of the time you think of a musician, someone probably in Brooklyn College, in a room somewhere they're locked in, they're practicing their scales, and then voila, they come out with this piece of music. You go to the concert hall, you hear it. The pan yard and panorama is different. You're basically doing this in a communal setting that's open to the public. You know, people can come in, hear the mistakes, they hear the warts, they see the dress rehearsal, they see the half dress rehearsal. So it's an interesting way of creating music. You basically create music in a public sphere, which is probably unique, I think, to the steel band genre.
Could you talk a little bit about the process? Because up until recently, if I understand this correctly, there was very little written music. Is that right? That things were taught mostly by ear? And How would that work when you have 100 people, or even 75 people, however big one of these bands is?
And sometimes it doesn't work, but no, but it's following the African oral tradition. So pan came out of that type of resistance movement. So the first pan players were not quote unquote trained musicians. So everything was done orally. You would have someone that is a little bit more skilled, maybe they have better hearing, they have better rhythm. So they would come up with the tunes and they would show it to people. Some people learn by listening, some people learn by visual, looking at someone and mimicking their hand motion.
Watching them actually play the pan.
Watching them and do the motion. So there was, I think, even from the beginning of pan, there was always one or two people in the band that quote unquote knew music. You know, the arrangers tend to have been either schooled or self-taught. But pan, it has this long tradition. It's all, I consider it like playing street basketball for people who play sports. Sometimes you don't need a coach. It's good to have a coach, but after a while, people just start picking up on things from an elder. Okay, he experienced, oh, this is what he does. As a young person playing, I picked up on stuff from Winston and those guys. Like, oh, that's how they do that. So a lot of it is oral. Now there's a lot more people that are quote unquote schooled in music and can read. But for the most part, Panorama is still continuation of that oral tradition of music. This is how it sounds. You listen to it, repetition, and voila, at some point you have 8 to 10 minutes piece of complex music, which is the end product that you're looking for.
In case people haven't been to Panorama, maybe just describe that real quick, like what happens at Brooklyn Panorama as it does in Trinidad.
Yeah, Panorama is probably one of the most intense competitions around. I consider it a combination of World Cup, religion, and politics. So it's all mixed together. It's this, could be a friendly rivalry, it could be a vicious rivalry, but it's this, you're playing for pride, it's not really money, so you have these local bands that practice for the whole summer, and come that Saturday, their goal is to win this competition. So it's fraught with anxiety, it's fraught with the judges, because now it's a subjective competition, so there's always the judges that like us, so it's that kind of competition. So it's tremendously partisan. You hardly hear anyone that plays in a band or their family plays in a band that think that band lost. So
you mean they don't always agree?
Right, whatever band that you're in, you essentially think they won. So it's a really competitive, passionate thing. It's almost exists it's a world within a world. It's this Brooklyn movement that been happening for, I guess, probably like 40-something years, that is really intense. It's, but I said, it's like World Cup, it's religion, it's partisan, and it's beautiful too. It's a lot of disappointment and a lot of, jubilation too. So it kind of spans the gamut of human emotions, I think, which makes it special.
So if you haven't been, please come next year. Actually come to the Pan Yards during the summer. It's a great place to hear the music.
You'll see this art. It's like a painter. It's happening in front of your eyes.
So we'll come back to Steel Pan in a moment when we're going to have some live music. But I'd like to switch over now and talk about the soca music that was produced here in Brooklyn in the 70s and 80s. And to do that, we're going to talk to Frankie McIntosh. Can we get the next piece up, the Wind Down Kingston? Yeah, okay, great. So I thought maybe we will start by just listening to a little, and this is one of the first arrangements you did, I guess, with Alston Beckett, right?
Yes, this is in the second album. I think
Okay.
this is about 79. I'd done a previous album for him in 78, which was titled Coming High. This one is from the album Coming Higher, which was the following year.
Okay, so I'd like everybody to just listen to not just the singing of Beckett, Alston Beckett, that was his stage name, Beckett, which is fantastic, but try to listen to a little bit about the music underneath, especially the horn lines, and then maybe we'll push forward and listen to a couple of solos. Very jazzy sounding music for Calypso in 1978, at least to my ear. So if we could, Maestro.
I'm sorry for your trouble. Don't forget my love. Oh, my baby goes to my life. My name is Soca. My holy wine. Holy wine. You know I don't give some fire. You know I don't die. Oh, you know I don't give some fire. You know I don't die. Where's all the line? Why you ruin mine? You go and go and go and go and go and get some fun.
Thank you. So, Maestro, can you tell us a little bit about how you go about doing an arrangement like that? If a Calypsonian comes to you with an idea, how do you turn it into that?
Well, I was listening about the number of times, you know, and every time I hear one time of the melody, listen to one time, I get a different idea. Each time I listen to it, I hear different things in my head. And I will go on the panel and I will try to figure them out.
So that's when you're working from a recording
From a recording,
for the
yes,
idea.
yeah.
Okay. Let me ask Frankie McIntosh, if a Calypsonian comes to you and just, I don't know, with some lyrics maybe, how do you turn it into this kind of a recording?
Okay. Well, in this particular recording, well, the title is Wind Down Kingstown. Now, I'm from St. Vincent. The capital of St. Vincent is Kingstown. That's the main town. Beckett is also from St. Vincent. So the song exhorts the listeners and participants in Carnival to just have a good time. I mean, forget all your worries, you know, gyrate, you know, which is a synonym for wine. And okay, so let's say you have this haunting idea for a melody for a song. You take it to an arranger. You're sure it's going to be a hit. You want the arranger to put parts to it. Instrumental parts, like bass line, sound parts, and so on. I mean, the first thing I would do, as a fact, the first thing I did in this case, Wind Down Kingstown with Beckett, was to establish the key. Which keys you're going to sing it in. And maybe I should just demonstrate to the piano what I mean by that.
Please.
So let's say he starts singing, and I think he could sing it a little higher, so I say, so we keep going up until he says, okay. Now I say, okay, try a half step higher. Says that's too high, so we go back to the previous key. So we establish the key, that's the first step. Okay. The second step, I would try to get an idea what tempo would be most comfortable for him. As you can hear, this is really fast. This is about probably 135 to 140 beats per minute. So that done, I would find out from the artist, what are your expectations for this song? What's your market? Is it a panorama type song, you think? Or you intend to enter for the Calypso competition in it? Or is it just for listening? So once that's established, I get into the more detailed aspects of arranging, which would be harmonizing the song. Now, I mean, today, the song will probably be harmonized something like this. Which I find a little bland, but back in 78, see, you could have, used like more colorful harmonies, like. For the chorus. Now for the verse, it goes like. Which could be harmonized. Which is basically 5 to 1. 5. Yeah, but I decided to add some color to that and made it. So Another thing I would look at, and looked at with the song, was the idiom. You create a part for an instrument. You figure out, I mean, is it really idiomatic for that particular instrument? So I came up with a bass line, like, which I thought would work well on bass, and it would also work well on pans, for a bass man. As far as the horn lines go, I was tempted at first to I decided to blues it up a little, so instead of, I made it. Now so that having been established, we go to the studio, and in the studio, the musicians are usually called from a short list. Mostly people from the Caribbean. I mean, experts, well trained on the, well experienced on the instruments. Mostly from Trinidad, but I've had players from Panama, from Jamaica, from Guyana, St. Vincent, pretty much all the Anglophone islands. And so we get in the studio. Usually, I would write, but back in that time, I would write everything up by hand. So that the parts, the sections, the principal sections of the song are well delineated. So section A, I put a big A in the music, that would refer to what we call the band chorus, which is the section where the lead vocal doesn't sing. Traditionally, the horns will play a version, instrumental version of the vocal chorus based on the same chords. So the chorus goes, chords will go, and the band chorus, the horns will play. So that would be the A section of the band chorus. Next follows the B section, which is where the lead vocal would come in, and the main chorus would be labeled C. In this case, though, there's a sort of transition, but I don't want to get too technical. Yeah, so in the studio, if I say let's start from section A, B, C, whatever, section F, everyone will turn to that page, would be literally on the same page, right?
So these people could all read music. I mean, Garvin was
Yes.
talking about an oral tradition, but now you're working with musicians who are reading musicians.
They're all trained musicians, yes.
And you've written these lines out for them to read. It's not
Exactly.
just you're singing it to them or something.
No, they're reading from, each person would have his own part. Initially, I would do it on a score paper, have all the parts on one sheet, and then it would be copied individually. Like the trumpet player would have his own part, sax player would have his own part, and so on. So, and after that, if there are any suggestions, although I write the parts, they're not written in stone. So if the engineer has an idea, a trumpet player has an idea, Frankie, how about this note instead of that? How about this part instead of that? I will change it. If I think it enhances the arrangement. So I don't know if that answers at least part of your question.
That's great. No, wonderful. I'll tell you what. Let's do, since we're going along here. Let's take a few minutes before we have our music and see if some of you have some questions for these gentlemen. Someone must have a question.
I'm
Yes.
just a layman, but the only name that comes to mind, but you comment, Harry Belafonte, I mean, with Calypso, am I correct? Is he considered, a devotee of Calypso, or is that mass media, or what?
Maybe in the United States, but not
In the United States, but not in the island?
No.
Okay, thank you.
The Mighty Sparrow, the Mighty
I heard
Kitchener.
of him.
Yeah.
And Lord Kirshner, I believe. Kirshner, is it?
Kitchener.
Lord Kirshner?
Kitchener, yes.
The others I haven't heard of.
Yeah,
So-
and,
so-
and Beckett, of course.
Could I just ask, especially the two Trinidadians sitting here, over here, like, is Belafonte not considered a bona fide calypso singer?
But Belafonte is not considered a calypsonian in true sense.
He's a,
At least by the people of Trinidad and Tobago anyway.
Because if you all know, he is from, anybody know? Jamaica. Well, actually, he's born here, but his parents are
In the
Jamaican.
United States, but he grew up in Jamaica.
well, he's a civil rights leader anyway.
Oh, he's a wonderful, wonderful leader in many ways, but a lot of real calypsonians didn't think he was authentic. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Yeah.
What he does is fine, I mean, for him, but it's not, as you say, not authentic calypso. There's something missing.
Thank you.
Other questions?
When in the studio, right, how many musicians or like tracks would you have? Because from my understanding, back in like the 70s and the 80s, recording technology, like you weren't able to have as many tracks as you are able to today. So how would you incorporate, because from my understanding in like a steel orchestra, you have many, many different layers. So how would you like work around the technology in order to incorporate all those layers within the recording?
Well, we used analog recording back then. There wasn't digital back in the
Yeah.
1970s. So you had two choices. You had a tape, about a 2-inch tape, which could accommodate about 16 individual tracks or 24. So usually there was enough space for each instrument to have its own track. You figure like maybe 5 tracks for the drum, bass drum, snare drum, and so on, and then there were 5 horns. And so there were ample tracks. I mean, now we spoiled with the digital technology and all the availability of all these tracks. And people keep adding tracks, and it's like adding extra wheels to a stage, to a stage cart, you know. So.
But when you started, you had multi-tracks then. But when you first started in the studio,
there
by
were
then.
multi-tracks, but the multi-tracks were on one tape. That's what you're referring to, right? I mean,
Yeah, because I know there's like a couple of, like in Michael Jackson's album, Thriller, like a couple of songs on there, they had to like layer a bunch of instruments on one track because they didn't have enough space with the analog recording technology that they were using. So I was wondering if it was like in the
right.
same
So
case.
if that did occur, what they would do was mix down like the 24 tracks
Yeah.
to like 2 tracks, and then you erase what was there before, which would open up another 24. So, well, Trevor could say more about that. He's a recording expert. He's a technical expert with that.
Other questions? Oh, somebody must have some questions. You know it all.
Just for the purpose of my class. So I'm from Trinidad and I grew up behind a pan yard. So I hear pan, grew up hearing pan all the time. Talking to a friend in Trinidad about panorama there and being frontline. So being the ones who, stand to the front when the tenor plan, during the competition. And everyone gets to play frontline. And one particular band there, we were talking about the band leader has like his New York players who would actually, come to Trinidad for panorama to play for the panorama there, which very much speaks, to diaspora being transnational in that way, right? People moving back and forth. So I want to know, what are your experiences with that? Possibly going back to Trinidad to play there, or Trinidadians coming back to New York to play, coming to New York to play here. What are the experiences, with connecting maybe your pan groups here and the pan groups in Trinidad?
So the question is, were people going back and forth between Brooklyn and Port of Spain and playing in bands in both situations? Did you note any of that in the 1970s? Or was
Just
it?
a few in the 1970s, but a lot more people doing that right now, today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Garvin, did you?
Right, yeah, I experienced, I mean, myself, I did it in, I think I left high school, I snuck out of high school at Carnival and went in 1977 and played. And I also played in 84. But now, and I think we touched on Clive Bradley, I think Clive Bradley, the arranger, he was big in New York, and he has like a whole, what I consider the Bradley children. So they were raised on Clive Bradley's music, they became proficient. He was there So you started having kids who were familiar with Bradley. Now Bradley's in Trinidad for Carnival. This is the winter. Hey, I'm heading to Carnival. So there's a lot more of that now, to the point where they're New York-born arrangers. They were born in New York, that they're arranging for bands. Arrangers like King and a Panyard, that was unheard of. All the arrangers were either from Trinidad, but now you have New York born, bred arrangers that go to Trinidad, and lots of players. And people do bring down their players, and there's that partisan, oh, he's from Chasm, he's gonna bump you, and you get to the back, and that's where the fight starts. No, just kidding. We don't fight in steel bands.
I might add that Kendall Williams, who is on our faculty now and teaching a course in Caribbean Studies on Caribbean music, which he will be teaching in the spring, was born here.